organizers doing the work across the South and Appalachia. I'm Lauren Kari. I write for Reproductive Justice in the Southeast. And today I am joined by a really exciting guest, Beth Howard. She's a cultural strategist for Showing Up for Racial Justice, known as SURGE, and creator of the viral narrative campaign Rednecks for Black Lives. She is the author of Song for a Hard Hit People, a memoir of anti-racist solidarity from a coal miner's daughter, out of Haymarket Books in April 2026. This book, give a brief kind of talk before I let Beth discuss it. Follows Beth from her childhood in Eastern Kentucky through her evolution as an organizer, and I think offers a really solid roadmap for how we can start to build cross-racial working class solidarity in the South. Beth, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, and super happy to be here.
Uh, I'm repping today with my Kentucky mug and we've got our red bandanas in solidarity. So let's go ahead and just kick it off with a kind of general question. For those who haven't been lucky enough to pick up your book yet, and if you could go local, support your local bookstore when you can. Give us kind of a brief sense of what Song for a Hard Hit People is and why you made that decision where you were like, you know what, I think I want to start looking at making this into a book.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Song for a Hard Hit People, a memoir of anti-racist solidarity from a coal miner's daughter, is a memoir. And it follows my story as a child growing up in rural Eastern Kentucky in my tiny community of Blaze, through my evolution to becoming a community organizer and someone who is a white Southerner who is really committed to the fight for racial and economic justice. And so I really wanted to show that my commitment to white anti-racism is really because of where I'm from and because I'm from Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia, because I grew up there as a working class rural woman, and not in spite of it, which is what I think the kind of common thinking, stereotyping, and narrative is about us and our place. And that throughout it, I wanted to also, the stories that I chose to tell both showed my self-interest and my commitment to this work, the ways that organizing, community organizing and building working class power across lines of difference really impacts me and my family and my place, but also to show those who might be organizing, who wanted to hear from another organizer how she did it, and to tell kind of particular stories that might illustrate the steps a person could take to, let's say, do a one-on-one organizing conversation, or to go canvassing, or run a campaign. And so I wanted to write something that was interesting, that was compelling, and that was a story, because I think Southerners are the best storytellers, and so are working class people. It's very much a part of our culture, how we hold on to and pass along our history, how we entertain ourselves, and how we teach and learn and pass along information. And also, the last thing I'll say about that is, if you read the book, you'll find this out. But growing up, sorry, my computer for just a minute. There we go. Okay, but growing up, I really wanted to be a writer, and I really wanted to tell stories. Because I was such an avid reader, and it was something that in my chaotic childhood and home that really gave me a lot of solace. And so I really wanted to grow up and write books. And so it took me a longer time than I had hoped, but I really wanted to come back around to that. And I'm really happy and lucky that I did.
Yeah, we all are so much better for you publishing this piece and having it out into the world. There are, I think, a few things I want to talk about that you touched on right there, and speaking about your book, and that is the culture of Appalachia,
Yeah.
because the people there is what motivated me and shaped the trajectory of my advocacy life, of the stories and the way that they treated me with such kindness and so much intelligence. People in Appalachia are so smart,
Mhm.
and how I carried that with me in my work in DC and, abroad. But I would love to talk about how you were able to distill some of those cultural nuances.
Yeah.
How you decided to talk about the community, and, display some of those traditions that y'all have.
Yeah, I mean, Appalachia is a place that has been, publicly, like we were saying, stereotyped, maligned, often people outside the region kind of using us for their personal gain, whether that be our culture, our stories, or like natural resources, our labor. And so I think for many of us who are writing about this place and our people, we are being really, really thoughtful about and trying to be really thoughtful about how we do that and the story we choose to tell. And so when you're writing memoir also, there are some of us who were really sitting there like wanting to both defy stereotypes and also not gloss over the things that were hard about the way we grew up as well. And so I was really nervous and scared that, my own people might read this book and feel like it didn't accurately represent our place or our people. But in order to write it, I had to really kind of move through that and trust that my values were in the right place. I was surrounded by people who really cared about me and this state and our place in the world and shared my politics, and that my readers, um, that they're not going to let me put anything out into the world that would be harmful or hurtful, and also to trust myself that that's not what I'm doing. And
Yeah.
so that allowed me to just write and to try to tell about my life and the people here and the things we have gone through in the most honest way that I could. And I think for some of us, myself included, we hear those stories of us that kind of frame us as ignorant, backward, uneducated, violent, kind of bringing tragedy upon ourselves. And we're the reason people can't have nice things. And so we have kind of at times maybe swung too hard the opposite direction because we want to say, look, we're all these things, we are smart, we are people with loving families and meaningful work, and some of us are making it, and we're look at all this success and all of these things, to the point that it's probably dodging or covering up some of the real struggles we do have here. And so my goal was just to tell the truth about my life and experience here the best that I could, and trust that that nuance and that complexity and the love that I have for my people would shine through.
Yeah, well, it absolutely translated. And the humility that you brought to it as well. I think it's just such a beautiful piece. And I think one of the first writing of modern Appalachian culture that in my head, as I was reading it, I was like, I could name, like, I could name her mom in my life. I could name your brother and think of all these people, your dad. There's the similarities. I think it was such a beautiful way to showcase the nuance, the enmeshment within families, but also within the community. Um, and I would love to kind of speak a little bit about how kind of Appalachian culture is conducive to grassroots organizing and mutual aid. Um, I'd not trying to make this about me, but when you connected those dots in my brain for me, I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
yes, we've always been doing this.
Yeah.
Since I lived in Kentucky in 2011, it was always like,
Yeah.
here's this making up rent. There's also a Venmo for an EKU account for mutual aid, and they'll post.
Yeah.
I'll have to get the details on who it is. Her first name's Missy,
Yeah.
but she'll say, "Hey, we have someone who can't pay their heat bill, and we're getting -10 today in Eastern Kentucky. Can someone Venmo for this?" And by the end of the day,
Yeah.
we've gotten it. So I would love for you to talk about that and how it kind of shaped your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So, where I grew up it was a 20-minute drive to get to a grocery store. And, so we lived in a very rural, uh, farmland, very tight knit little community. And so everybody had to work, so often a lot of the men would drive to coal mining jobs. Then our moms or women had to, they were working a lot out of the home as well. So my mom worked at a grocery store and later at a factory. My Aunt Carolyn was like an administrative role at the local elementary school. And so, um, we were always having, and everybody had kids. And so everybody was having to kind of help out and look after each other. So that meant at times carpooling, sometimes several hours to get to a job site each way for my dad and our neighbors, someone to pick the kids up once they got off the bus, and be with them so that, until my mom could come home, those sorts of things. We all grew gardens and shared our food with each other. If someone was sick, it's very much in our culture to go and take them food so they didn't have to worry about cooking. Those sorts of things are just the way rural people lived. It's like if you didn't have, if you were trying to make cornbread or something and you ran out of buttermilk, you're not going to drive 20 minutes to the grocery store. You need to knock on the neighbor's door and ask them for help. And so we lived very communally. And so, we didn't have a framework of mutual aid in that political sense, but that's just how we lived. And I think that's how a lot of rural people live because in order to really survive and have a life, you look out for each other. And I think that's how working class people live too. Like, we don't have the money to hire someone to do all of these things for us, right? Like, we're often, balancing multiple jobs and responsibilities and kids. And so we all pitch in and help each other as much as we can. And I think the dominant system, let's say capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy, those that oppress us really want to make us individuals and to make us isolated. And so I think growing up rural really helped me and positioned me well for building relationships, which is one of the strongest, most important roles of community organizer. And I will also say we have a very fierce, like working class identity and sensibility about us and a history, which is, we're wearing our red bandanas. And so that's just one example. But these are a symbol of the Redneck Army. In 1921, a group of 10,000 multiracial coal miners in West Virginia in the Battle of Blair Mountain, the largest multiracial labor uprising in this country's history. And they were fighting for the right to unionize, and they wore red bandanas as a symbol of their unbreakable solidarity and that they were part of a union, and that distanced them from people who were not part of the union and who are not supporting the union. And so we wear these now as a sign of solidarity, and I write about that in the book. The cover of the book is a red bandana. As a call into this is what it means to be Appalachian as well, is to be in solidarity around workers' rights. And so I think all of those things have really positioned a lot of us here to be really strong organizers, activists, advocates, run really strong mutual aid programs, issue-based campaigns, any of that stuff. So
Yeah, and it's funny. I really want to underline that comment you made about the community never called it mutual aid.
right.
You know, I almost feel like some of the terms that we have created are, I don't want to say like gatekeepy, but they're a different language and kind of a jargon in the advocacy world that I think could intimidate people who are like, oh yeah, I work in mutual aid. And it's, to someone in the outside world or someone in rural, they're like, I've never heard of mutual aid. Like that's never been a part of the vocabulary. Um, but yeah, I'm grateful that you highlighted the fact that you all are looking out for each other. You all are, people in Appalachia are dependent on each other. I will say my time in Appalachian working in rural Kentucky, when I first introduced myself at the places that I, was supporting, it was a little bit of hesitancy because they said, who are you related to? And I
Yeah.
had to give them the spiel of, well, I'm from Indiana, but I've lived here and for X amount of years, and now I'm doing this. And um, it was almost like a little bit of a test of like, how are we going to start to interact with you? Not in a prejudiced way, but to me, once I was in,
Yeah.
the kindness knew no level of, no depth. It was just remarkable to see. But I almost feel like that's almost a protective mechanism in some way because the community in Appalachia have been so exploited by people outside of the region, be
Absolutely.
it coal companies,
Yeah.
even the government tried to go in and say, we're from the government, we're here to help. And it completely backfired. I believe it was Reagan during that time tried to help the community there. Um, and so I definitely understand the hesitation of meeting new people. But once just like meeting any group that you don't initially belong with, showing up with humility, they're very welcoming and warm people. Um, Speaking of the people in Appalachia and family and friends, I would really like to just briefly talk about your father. Um, I want the people to read more about him, but I felt like he was almost kind of like a second main character
Oh,
in this story and just a larger than life character.
yeah.
And like I said, I think I want a lot more stuff for readers to be surprised about and read in the book and enjoy that opportunity to understand you through that medium. But I would love to talk about his worldview and kind of how that impacted your view.
Yeah, absolutely. And so my dad, Scotty, is an incredibly important character in the book and obviously was an incredibly important person in my life that shaped the way I see the world and my politics. And so since we're kind of invoking him into the conversation, I know he would want me to address Ronald Reagan because he really hated Ronald Reagan, and so do I. And so I think maybe the period of time you were talking about was the war on poverty, which was the Kennedy
Oh,
administration
thank
in
you
those
so
earlier years. And Ronald Reagan actually was the president when during my era. I was born in 1980, and his kind of rhetoric around where the scariest thing you can hear is we're from the government and we're here to help was actually to decimate and destroy programs that really helped Appalachia, which were programs like Social Security, healthcare, Medicaid, food benefits, those sorts of things, to dismantle all of that. And so a lot of the programs that really helped our family, which informed my dad's politics and my grandparents, which were kind of New Deal, um, FDR Democrats, and also in the culture of the United Mine Workers of America, who were really adamant that at that period of time they were supporting Democrats because Democrats were more supportive of unions than Republicans. So, all that to say, he was really clear on his class politics, in the sense of really instilling in me from a young age that there were people in the world, forces in the world that were really making a lot of money off people like us and our family by exploiting our labor, stealing the natural resources, right? And breaking down programs like the New Deal kind of social programs and policies that really helped people like our family. And so, I kind of talk about when I was a kid, I would go to the classroom election and talk about, Ronald Reagan, that I hated him and I would vote for, the other candidate in the little shoebox election
Yeah.
ballot box, and he also grew up in the Vietnam War era. And so that really shaped him. And he started a club in his high school. And that was the same place I went to high school. That was a place for students to talk about the Vietnam War. And he was always very adamantly anti-war. And he became someone I helped kind of process that Iraq war and Afghanistan, the never ending like war on terror with. So, in all of those ways, he really, really shaped my politics. And it was one of those things too, where I grew up as an adult and, went to school and really was, forming my own ideas and opinions about what I thought about the world and how it worked. And it just happened that I was like, Dad, you were right about that, which was a wonderful feeling. And I always also say that, my dad is a very complicated character. There were a lot of times in my younger life where he was struggling with addiction, and there was a lot of chaos and domestic violence in my childhood. And also really understanding that the parts of me that many parts of me that I really love about myself and that my friends would really love about me are parts of him, right? And, the fact that he quit drinking and kind of changed his life that allowed us to have a relationship and to do our best to repair some of that. And so I wanted to present him just like I present our place, which is a nuanced, complex thing that really asks the question, what happens to people? What happens to our relationships when a group of people, a place has been hit so hard by outside forces that impacts the way that we live our lives, the choices we have, the choices we don't have, and the kinds of traumas that it inflicts on generations of people. And then how can we live our lives in such a way that we are transforming ourselves, transforming our relationship as we also fight to transform our place?
Yeah, that's such a beautiful segue into what I wanted to talk about, which was, you know, what are we living through here currently, but what do we want it to look like? And I think for those who grew up in perhaps survival mode or fight or flight,
Yeah.
dreaming about what you wanted was kind of a luxury that
Yeah.
you couldn't afford. For me growing up, it was never like, what do you want to be? It's, let's think about, practicality. Let's think about all of the bills and things that need to get paid. And what I loved about your book and also kind of carrying this into your career was that moment that someone had said, okay, but what do you want the future to like, your dream future to look like? What would you want that? What would you want things to be like? And that paradigm shift, I think, is a lot of the missing pieces in advocacy work.
Yeah.
A lot of people in this space that I know of and organizations that I've worked a part of have always kind of tried to communicate and educate what's currently happening.
Yeah.
And we lose that piece of what do we want? What do we want it to look like? What's a life without struggle look like?
Mhm.
And I was so incredibly appreciative to you outlining that and how you carried that through your conversations when you would go canvas in Ashland. I mean, you mentioned it in your time in Jacksonville, but how has that mindset of it doesn't have to be like this, what can we do, how has that kind of worked as you start thinking about systems changes?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm from, a background of organizing in Kentucky and also in the South. Um, and, in my previous roles, we would always ask people, especially here in Appalachia when I worked as a Kentucky organizer, because we are and were in a transition from a coal-based economy to a new future, a new economy, right? And so we would often ask people like, what's our vision of a future Kentucky? And I would notice that so many of us would just kind of shut down. It would be quiet. It was so overwhelming to really think about that. And I would say it was scary because of kind of the things that you alluded to there of like when you grow up in poverty and you grow up in a place where there is so much injustice, it is really scary to dream about a future or to hope or to want something different because we kind of get used to something happening and sweeping that all out from under us, right? Or not getting the thing and feeling brokenhearted. And so I think sometimes some of us as a trauma response kind of protect ourselves by just saying, like I'm just trying to make it day to day. And that's what capitalism does. That's what these systems do is a lot of people really are just trying to make it from day to day, from paycheck to paycheck. And it's hard to pause and look out into the future and also to even think what is life outside of this system. And I think, there are some really obvious ways that capitalism is robbing people when you start to look through that lens, right? Like our labor,
Yep.
our time, spent with our family, our physical health, our environment, the resources, on and on. But it also robs our imagination. It wants us to think that this is the only way it could ever be. There is no other alternative way to live. And so I think good organizing is really asking those questions of what do we actually want? How do we really want to live? And what would our lives be like? And to really try and practice feeling that, like, what would it feel like if we never had to worry about paying for healthcare? If we could just go to the doctor and have medicine, right? If you are a parent, how would it feel to just have childcare that was safe and actually free? How like we would have like what would it feel like to like not work to give your wealth to somebody else, but to have it be and stay in our community and to kind of build a community together that we take care of each other, right? And so really wanting a future and understanding that that could actually happen, that these aren't just like, some foolish dream, which is how they want us to feel like, but these things can actually be and happen. And I think about the mayor of New York City, right? Like we're seeing Zoran Mamdani like implement things that he campaigned on that a
Yeah.
lot of people were saying, well, he'll just say that and then he's not going to be able to do all of that. But he is implementing things that are, people in New York City will have childcare. That is huge. And so we could all have those things. And I think an organizer's job is to help us imagine and have that kind of radical imagination and fight for that and want that more than what we're living in now.
Yeah, and I love that you're bringing in modern day events because I almost feel like up until 2026, it was like I'm gonna struggle to articulate this, but it was almost like there was a veil in front of our eyes where we weren't quite connecting how the billionaires were really draining a lot of resources from the middle class, how there was such health inequality in our country. And I think a lot of people that I was door knocking with and speaking with didn't quite believe that level. And not to say that they were ignorant, but I think in 2026, there's no hiding behind policies or anything like that. I think now it's so in our face by
Yeah.
having billionaires in the front row of this, administration, and by having it so in our face, and by paying a ton of money for these funds for different insurrectionists. I'm seeing a lot of articles with the headline, if we have 1.7 billion for this,
Right.
what about healthcare? What
Completely.
about SNAP? And I think it's really starting to click. I think we're such an early adopter, and connecting those dots. And now I think it's so much more obvious and transparent that they're just here for money. And
Totally.
they don't like that they have to go through us to get more, like human beings to get more. And so I'm so grateful for your book. And I kind of want to like take that, but take a step back and just address there's a moment in your book where you are in a women gender studies and you're like, the patriarchy.
Totally.
And it was kind of like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
this kind of explains so much. And to me, I felt that there was a little bit of healing once you could name a system. And I felt like perhaps that was the gateway into understanding systems impact. Can you talk a little bit about that moment and kind of how it broadened your perspective on inequality?
Completely. Yeah. And, you know, one of the things about the moment we're in too, is that yes, it is laid bare, and that's because a lot of these systems are falling apart. They're, you know, this administration and the billionaire class and those before them have been just dismantling our government, and like I've heard people say, you know, selling it for parts, right?
Yeah.
And so we are in a point where this whole system is going to change. It is already changing, and there will be a big transformation. And so what kind of transition is that gonna be, is gonna be up to the people to for us to organize for the world that we really want. And so I think, you know, as bleak as it is also the, you know, if we really look at it, this change is gonna happen and we have to organize and demand the future that we really, really want and deserve. And so yes, and, you know, political education is a really important part of organizing and a really important part of my life. And so when I went to school at Eastern Kentucky University, I had an incredible teacher in my women's studies class, who, you know, now it's a whole department and it's gender studies. But at that point, it was women's studies, and I took the intro class with Marta Miranda, LCSW, if she's ever listening. And really, she changed my life. And it was one of those moments where, you know, we spent time thinking about the ways, you know, that gender played out in our personal lives, you know, and I document a lot of that in my book, right? The way, the violence, the everyday indignities, the way that women were expected to, in this era, work outside the home, but also manage everything in the home, the kids, take care of their husband and wait on them, constantly be cooking and cleaning and not having like a life of their own, like creativity, political life, or anything outside of the home, right? And so all of those things. And I think that the systems in place want to be hidden, right? Where they're just like, well, all of this is your fault. These are things that are happening as you're trying to get this job and you don't get it. Well, that's because you're not good enough, right? Or somehow you've brought all this on yourself. And if you just work harder, when the reality is there are all these forces that are completely orchestrating everything. And patriarchy is a huge force that, you know, lifts up men and male supremacy over women and other gender oppressed people. And it is designed to continue to reward them for being men. And the way that then that violence and that hierarchy plays out in our day-to-day lives. And like we're seeing that right now, constantly, right? Um, Day to day, like again, these things are just being very laid bare in this era where we're not even trying to hide it anymore, which means, again, it's a huge opportunity for more and more of us to be radicalized, to politically awaken, to help others see what we're seeing so that we can change it.
Yeah. And I love that, that spin on it's an opportunity, because you're right, these systems are falling. I think we're seeing an extinction burst of a lot of the old ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And it really is giving us that ability to make a future that's ours. But you're right, you know, when we're so busy hustling for our rent payment, or we're so busy trying to manage a house and everything that goes with it and a family, you don't have the time or the bandwidth to be creative, to think bigger, to figure out what you want to do with your life. You know, that's not even a choice that I felt a lot of the people I had met in Kentucky or Eastern Kentucky had. It was like, well, you know, I'm third generation coal miner, so that's, you know, it's a good living. It's hard, but that's what I'm gonna do. And so I couldn't agree more that I think it's an opportunity for how we can move into the future. And um, thinking about how we're moving with advocacy right now, you know, you were a community organizer long before Obama kind of shone a spotlight on it.
Totally.
And I love that you got to see your representation in your career and what you were doing. Um, I would love to know about your kind of take on what's been happening since the beginning of your career to now in the advocacy space, because I've seen changes in just the, I mean, maybe decade that I've been an advocate and working on the ground. But I would love to hear how you've seen this area change.
Yeah. So, I actually started organizing. I was trying to think when it was, probably 2006, 2007 ish era. And then, yeah, when Barack Obama ran for office, this kind of career that I didn't even know existed before I went to an orientation for it. Like, I just thought we were all really pissed in the same place at the same time. And, somebody brought some signs.
Yeah.
And by the time that I was growing up in the 80s, a lot of the unions had been busted up where my dad and other families were working. So I really didn't understand organizing and what it was. And the way that I was trained also was that the organizer is not the group leader. The organizer is getting and supporting the people and helping, them lead their group. Like, we're there to support the grassroots leaders. And so we're not at the front of the room. We're not saying, "Hi, I'm Beth Howard. I'm a community organizer," right? We are all part of the group, the community group, and the leaders are speaking as a group. And so all this to say, I kind of stumbled into being a community organizer by, right time, right place on my college campus. But yeah, then, the Obama campaign was like, oh, he was a community organizer in Chicago, and he's this communist that's going to come over and take over everything. And I was like, I wish he had been as radical as he was portrayed to be. But all that to say, so many people then were like talking about community organizing. And now I think the kind of moment that we're in is like, there's a lot of contradictions. In one hand, this career has been a career to me. It's been a way for me to make money, have a career doing something I really love and care about. And as far as like becoming organizing, often becoming part of a nonprofit kind of structure. And also, because here in the South, a lot of labor unions have been broken down. So a lot of people worked at a job and they were part of a union, and then they did their union work, right? But they made money from their job, whether they were auto workers, coal miners, nurses, whatever their job was. And so now it's kind of interesting because we in the South or here in Kentucky, we don't have a ton of union jobs like that anymore. And so a lot of people are gig workers or they're working in non-union workplaces. And then I was part of community organizing, which was a community-based grassroots group. And so what we're seeing from this administration and from, nonprofits are often get donors from very wealthy philanthropy, right? And so they're not really meant to be revolutionary spaces. That's not really what they're built for. And But they have allowed us to be paid to do this work and to have resources, which is critically important. And so those things are a contradiction in our time, or, forces that are at play here. And all that to say, I kind of worry at times that we've kind of got it in our head that to organize, we have to have a paid position and that we have to pay the members. And the truth is that the capitalist class, the Trump administration, the ruling class billionaires do not want this kind of work to happen.
Yeah.
And so there's a very good chance that I won't have my job maybe in the future, right? Or other people. And so we have to really start to understand community organizing as just a way of living our life, or, organizing working class people and being in political relationships as not just something that we do for a job or a hobby, but as a part of our lives and as a part of our political future.
All right, we got to end it there because that was beautiful. I don't even think I'm ever going to come back. No, I'm just kidding. But that was so profound because you're right. It is a way of living, and the nonprofit organizations don't have that scalability to really, get to more people because of the finances and the lack thereof. But you're right. It needs to be a culture change of how we interact with one another, the political engagement that we have. I've seen a lot of people recently now starting to engage at their local level, going to school board meetings when perhaps they would have never thought about doing that. And I think, democracy has never been a passive, or whatever system should never be a passive, we're going to let others handle it for us and make the decisions for us because we're too busy doing other things. But yeah, I think that's an incredibly great point to underline, is that, a lot of advocacy groups here in Florida as well are nervous. And I was talking to Representative Rita about this. She's represents Orlando in the State House of Florida, that, we just had this law passed and signed by the governor where any organization could be deemed a terrorist organization.
Yes.
So advocates in Equality Florida are, kind of very nervous because that could have a ton of legal implications individually, but as an organization would allow them to be disbanded. And so you're exactly right. It is such an act of resistance to meet your neighbor, to know who they are, to know more about their situation, to just see what's going on in their life and, start building community. And, it's buy one, get one diapers at the store. You want me to pick you up one? Little conversations like that, what is going to start changing everything. And then I'd like to kind of bring it to the current moment in political engagement looking like in Kentucky right now. I think 2026 and even, 2025, I'm in a very ruby red district and I've seen massive changes, but I'd love to hear from you about Kentucky and your area, Eastern Kentucky.
Yeah. And so, first of all, I always like to introduce myself to be like, I'm Beth Howard from the great Commonwealth of Kentucky. I love my state. I heard someone say the other day, like, they were teasing me, but they were like, how do you know someone's from Kentucky? And then I was like, don't worry, they'll tell you. So we're very loud and proud of who we are and where we're from. And that's Appalachia as well, and the South, I would say. And, this is, speaking our live stream now, speaking to people who may be outside of the South, right, or outside of Kentucky. And so really wanting to highlight that I think sometimes the rest of the nation, certainly the Democratic Party, have really thought that they could kind of fight off fascism or win elections by ignoring the South and ignoring what happens in Appalachia. And I think what we're seeing now is what happens when we do that. And so a lot of the kind of policies we're seeing enacted in the federal government and the things that we're seeing happening now were already happening in Kentucky and in the South, right? So our states have already been gerrymandered. We're already,
Yeah.
living in a authoritarian state government. We have, the South, thinking especially, further south, people were already being disappeared. I was thinking about people who were protesting Cop City in Georgia. I mean, all of these things that we are seeing happen nationally started happening in the South because the ruling class, the far right, has always used the South. And Appalachia as a place to hold power and consolidate it, that then allows them to have outside influence for the rest of the country
Yeah.
and the world. And so even if I look at Appalachia, many people politically across the country would say, well, Kentucky's a non-player. It doesn't even matter, right? But if we look at Kentucky and West Virginia, the right has always invested in us here. If we just think about Mitch McConnell, Joe Manchin was in West Virginia. Hal Rogers, who moves money to federal prisons and state prisons all over the country, he's like about to be 80 and has been the congressman in Eastern Kentucky for generations. And our people have only been economically worse off and worse off in every way. But he's kind of plays behind the scenes in charge of appropriations. We also have Rand Paul. I mean, we could go on and on. Also, J.D. Vance wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy, which, is completely grifting off of trying to use Appalachia and kind of our grittiness and, kind of credibility as a way to grift his way all the way to the White House. And so this region has always been politically very important. And so all that to say, right now, we just had our primary election and I am hooting and hollering. I was like, nobody can tell me nothing this week. At least 3 people that are people's champions, grassroots champions, made it through their primary. And one of those that is probably getting, I hope, national attention is Charles Booker for U.S. Senate. Thankfully, Mitch McConnell is not going to be in the race again. And so we have a real opportunity to shift this seat, to put a grassroots champion in this seat, someone who has lived experience as a working class person and who resonates across the state, from his home in Louisville, but also as he, his first campaign called it From the Hood to the Holler, to also speaking to issues like healthcare and housing that impact rural white people like my family. And so I think we are fired up here and ready to win that seat. And also, I will say in Ashland, Kentucky, in rural Eastern Kentucky, if you read my book, or if you've read it, you will know one of the stars of the book is a community organizing group called Kentucky People's Union. One of our leaders, Heather, oh my God, I'm just blanked. My friend Heather, Heather Hayes, for Ashland City Council, just won her primary. And she is a single mom, working class renter who ran on a housing campaign and is the mother of a trans child. And so we are so thrilled about that. Shamika Parrish Wright, working class leader who will be going to the general election for Louisville mayor. And so I am thrilled. And I think that we can see that people want authentic working class champions that come from our own people who love this state and who love the people that live in it. And so I think we're actually feeling pretty fired up here.
Yeah, first of all, I've got a few to say. I want to touch on the J.D. Vance book. I didn't bring it up because I'm sure you're getting a lot of that commentary on the book tour. And to me, I was disappointed. A lot of the research I did was rural reproductive health in grad school and in DC. And my first policy professor had mentioned, oh, rural in Kentucky, you need to read J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy. And I read it and I immediately threw it out. But I don't want it to be a homogenous, oh, this is an Appalachian book, because I don't know what that was, but this is something so different, so powerful, and so beautiful in describing the people and the community. So, yeah, you're exactly right. And then starting with Charles Booker on Tuesday, when I saw that he had won that primary, I mean, McConnell has had such a grip on the state for so long, and I've never met really anyone who's voted for him, but yet he's still he's still holding office, and just the strategy he's had. Um, Not a fan of his. However, I can appreciate the strategy that he's pulled off to get his party and his donors where they are to this day. And so I'm really excited to see fresh face community, members, community leaders, and you kind of talking about how you empowered people already in the community during your advocacy work, especially with your time in Jacksonville. I think that's exactly what we need more of in elected offices is we've got the people in these counties at the state level, hopefully going federal, but who are already leaders and perhaps don't know about it, wouldn't consider themselves an elected official, but giving them that representation of there's a mom who rents, who just decided enough was enough.
That's right.
I can do something. I can do something. I can run, or I can support her campaign, or take up action in some way. Um, but yeah, I love seeing some of the primaries that came out from Kentucky and Georgia on Tuesday. So I'm glad you're riding that high. We'll take it where we can get it in the advocacy
That's
world.
right.
But you know, I don't know. I kind of just feel like this book is so impactful. When you had published it and it was already, ready to go to the editors,
Yeah.
how did you feel about this body of work? Because you're very vulnerable in a beautiful, honest, authentic way. And it translates into this story. And I would love to know what was inside your head when you sent it off to the publisher for final, everything.
Yeah. I mean, by the time I sent it off, at that point, I was very tired, just
But
very, very exhausted on every multiple levels, but also felt really proud. And also just really my greatest hope of hoping that people would read it and that, the vulnerability and the years of labor writing it would be worth it because people would say, me too. I feel that way too, and kind of see themselves in this story. That a lot of women and people, who were like me, growing up in a rural place, who wanted their story told or elements of their story told in public in a way that calls us into our best selves, that portrays us in dignity. My hope was that they would see that in the book. And to me, I guess as an organizer all these years, we do a lot of one-on-one conversations and a lot of story sharing, right? A lot of sharing what brought us to this work and what do we want for the future, right? What are we willing to do to make that change? And so and also, as I said, I wanted to be a writer since I was a little girl, and I'm 45 now, and so I'd waited a long time to tell those stories. And so by the time it came to write them, they were just there. They were just tumbling out. And so for me, it's like fulfilling a lifelong dream, but it's also fulfilling a political commitment I have to the working class, to my state, to my region, to do some offering of storytelling, to put forth something that I won't say. Like I won't say I want to start a fight because we're already in the fight of our lives, but I want to throw some gasoline on that fire for the working class and to inspire as many people as I can to fight like hell for our future because that's what it's going to take.
yeah. Well, I can't give you enough flowers for this book. The education that you have about the systemic oppression and the policies, but pairing that beautifully with your lived experience, your advocacy work, and how you approached talking with people, how you went in with humility. as a North Star and wanting to listen. I mean, it's truly such an impactful book. And I recommend that everyone read it. I think it should be read in schools all over,
Yeah.
because it is really a way to start thinking and understanding that people are more of the cause of their environment and not, because of it. And I think once people start understanding the South has always been heavily gerrymandered and it was easy to always write off this region. But I think now through your work and communicating that and things that I say on my platform, where it's the South is the canary in the coal mine.
That's
You
right.
know, we're where all of the oppressive legislation is always usually rolled out first. And from there, it gathers momentum with, an ideological dogma or however, and it spreads to the rest of the nation. So I think hopefully with redistricting and this, now so blatantly done, a lot more people are starting to look at the South instead of just the coast and the people there. So before we wrap up, I've got, two things really quick I want to ask.
Yep.
Go ahead and give people a rundown of what the rest of your tour is going to look like, where you're going to be at.
Yeah, and I have to say on the last thing we were talking about the South, I should have said this earlier, so I didn't want to neglect saying it, but the South has been such a site, and Appalachia, such a site of true revolutionary working class power in this country, revolutionary working class Black political power that those in power have really invested in trying to push us down as much as they could to hide our history and to oppress us. And so yeah, I just
Yeah.
also wanted to kind of say that we also have such a powerful history that those in power don't want it told, and they don't, want us to have the things that we need here because we could change the whole damn thing. So, and that's what I hope we do. But
Yeah.
I am on book tour right now. Next week, I will be in Asheville, North Carolina. Next Wednesday evening, I'll be at Malaprops in Asheville. The following evening, that Thursday, I will be in Shelby, North Carolina at Box Turtle Books. And then on next Friday, I will have a virtual event at Birch Tree Books in Virginia, so anyone could join for that. And you can find that on my website at bethhowardky.com or on my Instagram, which is my childhood nickname, J Bethy Jean, JBETHIEJEAN. And here on Substack, my Substack is Working Class Love Notes. And my latest newsletter has my tour stops and a link to them in it. So.
Wonderful. And then the last question that I ask all the guests that I get to speak with is, as you're doing this work, I think of Audre Lorde and how through their disability, they communicated, you've got to find joy and you've got to rest. And I think of that phrase when I work with people who are out here trying to move the needle at a local level and a national level. What's giving you joy right now?
Yeah. The things that are giving me joy right now is art and creativity and my relationships. And, when we talk about like what's the world beyond capitalism, like we think of the things that are really often, very material. Like when I think about, we want bread and we want roses. We want bread, we want food, we want housing, but we also want roses. We want beauty and art and creativity. And so to me, the roses are giving me joy right now. So whether that's like finding local places to view and experience art, reading, I'm a knitter, like a new knitter, and I'm finding a lot of joy in doing that. Audiobooks, and podcasts and just enjoying things that I create and that other people create in the world. Music, it's been fun that all the book stops we've not at all of them, but at many of them, we've tried to have someone singing labor songs and playing Southern Appalachian working class music. And so those are things giving me joy right now.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely incredible. And I think so vital to have them in your daily routine, weekly routine, so we can keep this movement going and keep going. But Beth, unfortunately, we are at our time. I
Yes,
think I would have loved to talk for you for 9 more hours. But thank you so much for your time today. And in the Substack article that goes out with this recording, I'll include your tour dates,
thank you.
as well as your organizations, perhaps how people could donate to those
Yeah,
or get involved if they so choose to. But again, thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for everyone who watches.
yeah. Thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.